Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Monday, the 3rd of June, comes to you from London. And we're seeing the dollar just sinking lower. It was a pretty tough week for financial markets last week with the spectre of trade wars ratcheting up. And so we're just seeing the dollar coming off. It was looking strong last week, but now short-term bearish, but still outweighed by the upside of the medium and long-term and the short-term targets to the upside. Eurodollar recovering a little bit, but again, there's 5 downside targets on the short-term charts still hanging over us, and the long and medium-term charts are bearish. The dollar against the yen is stronger, although it has fallen quite a bit over the last couple of days. It is now looking bearish again. So that stronger yen really starting to dominate, and we're seeing the dollar turning bearish medium and long term against the yen. So that is one aspect that's not in the dollar's favor. Sterling is up slightly against that weaker dollar, but still bearish on all 3 time frames. And the sterling euro chart sank lower on Friday, but it's still sterling looking pretty weak against the Swiss franc. Sterling sitting at 126. Bitcoin sitting at $8,500. So we are still holding on to the gains that we've seen through May. So still looking pretty strong and just holding on to short-term bullish. A shortage of upside targets is making it quite hard to read. The S&P 500 index ended Friday considerably lower, and we see the weekly candle there. That was a big down week for the S&P, probably the biggest down week we've seen this year so far. So we saw at the end of last year we had a bit of a capitulation week. Quite interesting that we saw that down week last week. And the Nasdaq was down also, just hitting new multi-week lows, and the Dow also pushing lower back to levels not really seen since February. So we are seeing the markets really just falling away here, and the Russell 2000 index also pushing lower with multiple downside targets. So this sell-off is gaining some force. And interestingly, after such a bad week, you might expect to see a relief rally in the futures, but the S&P future is down 2/3% this morning, and the Nasdaq E-mini future is down 0.8%. So market set to fall even further as we go to the open today. The UK market is already down over 1% this morning, and again we're seeing here lows. Now we just look back here, we're seeing lows seen back in March, so we're looking at 2 and 3 month lows here, and the market is pretty bearish in the long term. Maybe a little bit of a head and shoulders there, just seeing that on the lagging line. So we are pushing lower there. FTSE midcap 250 down by 1%, so midcaps falling away as well. In Germany, we're down 0.75% on the DAX, and the CAC 40 in France is down 1%. So we are seeing moves there to the downside. Japan was down 0.75%. The Hang Seng was relatively resilient, down 0.1%, and the Chinese market was down 0.3%. But really, we're seeing markets struggling. The only one bucking the trend here is India, still looking strong, multiple upside targets, and bullish on all 3 time frames. That's the only stock market really that we can say that about in the majors. And looking at the Aussie market, it also sank over 1%. Brent crude has really fallen away very heavily over the last few days. We're back now at $60, $61. So having been in the 70s, we're really seeing that sort of gathering pace there. So we're seeing the sentiment weighing heavily there. WTI down by 1.2%. Interestingly, on Brent, we have got downside. We had this downside side to 62. That's been given a met. We don't have any more downside targets there. On WTI, we do have downside targets of 52, and again we're at that level. So we need to almost wait now for new targets to be able to call where it goes next. US nat gas sitting at $2.47, so very much in the doldrums here. Gold rising on this sentiment weakness and breaking out to the upside, looking very strong over the last 2 days, and so gold is the beneficiary of all this turmoil, and much the same for silver. US 10-year yields sitting lower at 2.09%, so that's really now gunning for that 2.2% level. We've got targets of 201 and 203, and so we're seeing that sentiment weighing heavily on interest rates. Looking at the stocks themselves, on Friday the Dow We had only one stock up, that was McDonald's. The worst performer was Verizon, down 4%, but pretty well everything selling off across the board. Cisco, Apple, we're seeing really big moves to the downside. So the markets are now entering some quite serious sell-off territory. On the Nasdaq, we had about 10 stocks up, nearly all stocks down. Stocks like Western Digital down 5.7%. We saw really big moves there. Facebook even down 3%. So we are seeing quite a lot of sell-off going on here. In the Aussie market, overnight, we did have some big rises here. Eclipse Group up 19%. So we did see some quite big moves there, but on the downside, equally, this was pulling the market down. Quite a lot of stocks down 7, 5, 4, 3%. So we are seeing still outweighing the rises. China was mixed, as we saw, down 0.3%. And then we look at the Indian market, which was actually up, backing the trend. We had Hero MotoCorp up 5.4%, Bajaj Auto up 4%. So we really are seeing quite a big move there to the upside. Looking now to European markets, if we take a look first of all at Europe, we'll start actually with the FTSE 100. We see here only 4 stocks up this morning, and that's how bad it is across the board. And if we look at the downside, Ocado Group down 4%, Hargreaves Lansdown 3.2%. These stocks still looking relatively bullish, the ones that are coming off the top. Here's the live prices coming in from Yahoo Finance. But we are just starting to see a lot of these rises being unwound. Looking at the FTSE 250 this morning, we've got Sentiment. They're up 4.7%. They're bucking the trend, but the chart looks pretty terrible still. Dargent Holdings also mostly moves to the downside, and Hoshas Mining Group, even though they're up, the chart's not looking great. If we look at the worst performers, we've got Premier Oil. They're off another 7%. The oil price really starting to hurt there. Cairn Energy, they're down 4%. Capita Group, they're down 4% as well. FTSE 100 company for a long time, now just struggling. Stocks like Just Group, which have been just in free fall for the last year, we're still seeing that performance, and underperforming the Dow now by some 54%. Taking a look at the upside, we've got into France, we've got only 2 stocks up. Danone in Paris, they're up by 4%. On the downside, you've got CRH Group, they're down 3%, and so we are just seeing again moves to the downside. A pretty bloody opening to markets this week. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.